Welcome back to Pass the Tots. I am your host, Michael Craig. It is a joy to be with you. We have with us one of our very own, the OG salesperson at Nutrislice, leading our growth team, Pat Stevens. Welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Mike. Glad to be here. This has been something that obviously I've watched this come to fruition and be born and be released out into the wild and be used. Heard people talk about it who I had no idea who had ever seen an episode. So yeah, glad to be here. It is an honor and a privilege to be here.
Well, Pat, we wanted to bring you on today because we want to talk about best practices in sales of food service.
Fantastic.
We particularly sell software, but everybody sells something: food, services, consulting, software, technology. It's everywhere. And I wanted to just pick your brain and get a sense for, what's best class. So my first question is, give us a state of the industry as you've sold into food service for a number of years. What do you know? What do you like? What do you like about selling in food service?
Oh my gosh. Well, that I think is the coolest part. And even as we've added new team members to the group, they'll go to their first or second shows and they come back and they go, oh my gosh, I get it. These are the funnest people to interact with. These are the funnest clients to sell to. More importantly, these are the funnest clients to help buy software. Because it's a group of professionals that just want to have an impact in their communities one way or another. And they do that via food. They're passionate about food potentially, but they're also just passionate about serving people. And so what we have the opportunity to do as a technology company is provide them a platform that enhances the services they provide. And it becomes more of a fun, engaging, strategic conversation than it is like, let me try to sell you. It's more of a collaborative, let's impact your world type of conversation, which is really fun.
The word partnership really comes to mind for me because in almost every non-commercial kind of food service space, the food service operators aren't necessarily competing against each other. And so it's very collaborative. They get together, they want to have best practice conversations. They want to ask for recommendations. They want to give recommendations about what's working, what's not working. And so a lot of times you find yourselves in these very collaborative environments where people want to do good and they're not afraid to learn and to ask around. And that makes it great.
You're totally right. This is a group that not only do they not compete against each other, but they idea share and they all collaborate with themselves to find what is the best possible options, solutions. It's why there's so many great publications out there where people are sharing their ideas, sharing the ways they're trying to innovate and do things differently. It's a really fun group to be a part of.
So what are some of the best practices? I mean, when you have a space where they idea share and there's strong collaboration, what are some of the best ways to kind of go about selling into food service operators?
I think one of the most important things that, I don't know, this is just personal opinion, but I think that our team tries to focus on is we have a what we call a sales process, but the sales process also has to focus on their buying cycle, their buying process. How do they go about making decisions? And we want to navigate away from being sellers, if you will, to being trusted advisors and being people that our clients can call on and say, hey, thinking about this, or hey, I think your product would help us achieve that, whatever it might be. That's always our goal. So we do have a structured framework in which we try to go about each and every single conversation. It may not all feel the same and no two conversations are the same, but at the end of the day, we know certain things will work, right? All the different people we need to chat with, the conversations we need to have, the questions we should ask, understanding, procurement processes, understanding the way in which people go about buying software if they've done it before. If they haven't done it before, then maybe we can guide a little bit. But then also marrying that up with, okay, so you want to be live with, let's say, our platform, obviously, by August 22nd. if implementation takes, say, 6 weeks, and legal review takes 4 weeks, and security review takes 1 week, and all those things, right? You back it out, and we want to just collaborate on that process. And how do we help you be successful in each of those steps that you have to go through, as we also make sure we touch on and help you and your organization evaluate what we're doing.
I think early on in Nutrislice, when I was doing sales, I was talking to a director leading a pretty massive program, and was excited to talk about Nutrislice and sell our solution. And as I gave the 30-second sales pitch, he said, "You know what? What we need to have you out and come do a dog and pony show." And I was like, "What is a dog and pony show?" And so I hop online, I'm Googling dog and pony show, and I'm seeing lots of dog and pony shows. But then I was like, hey, sales, dog and pony. And I learned that it's essentially like this experience where you go in and you just showcase benefits and features of whatever you're trying to sell and have a conversation around that, a dog and pony show. And for whatever reason, I was like, oh man, that feels really old school. Are we still doing dog and pony shows today, Pat?
I'm with you, Mike. One of the most uncomfortable positions to ever be put in as someone who's responsible for growth and sales at an organization is when you hop on a call and they go, show me what you got. And you're like, but I wanted to ask questions and I wanted to have a conversation. And they're like, no, we're here for you to show me what you got. And you're like, all right, I mean, I can do that. And Nutrislice has some incredible demoers. We've got some people who can show you every nook and cranny of the product that you want, almost to like a training level. But at the end of the day, if we're unable to connect it to what matters to the clients most, then we set ourselves up to potentially miss the mark. So we have, instead of calling them demos, we oftentimes navigate to the word discovery. And it's a mutual discovery, both directions, to ensure that by the end of the call, we know we have a really great fit and we've got something that will help you with your program, with your dining experience, with whatever it is you're trying to achieve. Or maybe we don't. Maybe there's a couple things we can work on. But overall, I think that's the goal that our team has, is to just find a way to have a conversation. And in that conversation, sure, we'll show products and we'll walk through pieces of the platform, but we want it to be very relevant to what it is that we hear you wanting to accomplish within your organization.
What I'm hearing from that is like, you're not afraid to get to know. I mean, sure, everybody wants to sell their product, but really, like, the process that you like to engage in is this discovery where it's like, do you have a need that we can help? And whether that's yes or no, the sooner we can get there, the better. Help you in your journey as well as us in ours.
100%. And to add to that, I mentioned earlier the trusted advisor. You've crossed that golden bridge when you're communicating right here via text message with your clients. That's when you've reached a level of trust, and it's not just, oh, that vendor, or oh, that salesperson. It's not just, oh, that client. It's like, oh no, my client at this organization who's doing some really cool stuff, and vice versa. They're going, oh, this vendor who's helping us achieve these things. That's it's almost like a marriage. We could almost do a dating talk.
We could. I think a lot of times food operators, their expertise is in food. Technology is a little ancillary, necessary. One of the fears that I think they might have is being sold a bag of goods that, just doesn't meet its end of the value proposition. What can everybody do in a sales process to kind of avoid that scenario?
That's an interesting question. I think there's usually fear involved in buying anything. Right? There's some level of that, no matter what it is. And you want to make sure that whatever you think it's going to do, it's going to do. I would have that same expectation on like my car, right? Like I want it to get me from point A to point B safely and work correctly and make sure that everything is exactly what I would expect. On the technology and on the software side of things, and by the way, you and Brian, our CEO, do a fantastic talk on questions to ask about software acquisitions. So if anyone has any inkling to learn more about that, I'm sure you could share it with them. But I think that's really what you want, is you want to know that the product you're buying works, that it's going to deliver the results you're hoping for, and that everything you're being told on a call with a seller, who hopefully turns into a trusted advisor, is exactly what you will experience. So that's where in the discovery calls, we start diving into product, because we want to show you live and in color, hey, this is how it works. It's pretty simple, pretty straightforward. The danger we could get into is almost showing too much, because we don't want to be confusing on that first call either. But yeah, is that what you were getting at there?
Yeah, no, I think that's really good. I contextualizing this idea of demos and dog and pony shows, I think that's the big like red flag, the gotcha moment that could happen is you may be able to check a box of an existing pain point, but you really don't know the full scope of whether or not you're going to get value unless you step back and really engage in a process that's more than just a product demo and pushing buttons and asking if they have this feature or how they handle that challenge, right? You need to really understand holistically, is this going to deliver on its value proposition?
Yeah, and one of the ways we gauge success in those discovery calls, amongst many things, is are we able to walk away from the call and understand the client's why? Why would Nutrislice be a great fit for them? That is a huge thing that I ask the team all the time, is why are they looking at Nutrislice and what can we help them achieve? But in addition to that, we have a recorder on there. This is kind of a separate topic, but we have a note taker and a call recorder on there, mostly for us to be able to take notes and keep track of things so that we can be effective in our communication with that client. But also we look at the percentage of talk time. And if we're talking greater than 2/3 of the time, usually we're like, oof, that's a lot. I would love it if every single one of those calls was like 50-50. That would be beautiful. But we don't always get there, but that to me also is a sign of success. Like, oh wow, they were really sharing with us what's important, what they're looking for, connecting dots between what they're seeing on the screen and what they can do and things like that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You are kind of famous in the Nutrislice landscape for creating this idea of the acronym map it out. You've spoken about it before, but just walk us through, like, what does it mean to map it out?
Yeah. If I'm famous in Nutrislice, I should throw out a disclaimer that this is definitely not my idea. This concept is probably a tale as old as time. But it's ultimately this idea, again, going back to collaborating and more of a partnership approach to the way in which we do sales and do a buying process with folks, is saying, so the map is mutual action plan or mutual activity plan. What are the steps along the way of making a purchasing or buying decision that enables you to know you're making a great decision and allows you to hit the timelines that you want to hit? And so I kind of alluded to this earlier, talking about, okay, if you want the Nutrislice Solutions live August 22nd, how do we back that out to today? And what are the activities that we need to check off on our side, you need to check off on your side to ensure success? And so depending upon the organization, those are things like maybe a marketing review. Maybe those are things like an IT and security review. Maybe there's an operations discussion and an implementation discussion. Maybe there is a facilities conversation that needs to happen. Then there's legal and procurement, right? There's all these different things that maybe you have to go through as a client, as the buyer. And we know from this point until when you say you want to be live, assuming that you're going to go ahead and move forward with Nutrislice, that we've got, let's say, 8 weeks. So we got a lot to accomplish in a short period of time. Know that implementation could take up to 6 weeks or what have you, right? So how do we back that out? There's a legal review process and all those things. And so one of the most successful things we can do is sit down with a client and map it out, mutual action plan it out, and create a map for ourselves of helping you reach that launch goal that you have. And it's tricky. Things come up. I always recommend buffer, right? Having some extra weeks in there is always a good thing. But it's really about matching up all the boxes that a client has to check and what you need to achieve to how we know successful deals happen.
That's awesome. If there's one thing you would suggest, what kind of tips do you have? Put yourself in the role of a food service director who wants to be innovative, wants technology. What do they need to do better during the sales process?
It's interesting. I probably would steal this from you. This is something you taught me all the way back to 2014, Mike. Is being curious, and that was obviously feedback for us, right? As a Nutrislice organization and interactions we have with clients and other things along those lines. But I think it goes similar to a sales process or a buying process, is however you want to look at it. It goes both ways, and I think being curious is really ultimately one of the keys on both sides. Asking questions, digging into maybe how things work, or how they make life better, or what impact they've had, or feedback we've received, or who else is doing what you guys are talking about. Those type of things ultimately provides curiosity. It opens doors, I think, and that's something that you have preached forever, and give you a lot of credit around that in terms of how you approach that. And then I think that's a great approach for anybody, clients alike, to take that approach.
The lighting here at Nutrislice just took a 180. Must be those automated lights. What if a lot in sales is just trying to capture attention at the beginning to engage in conversations. Historically, that's happened in food service in probably one of two ways. First, trade shows, you got your booth, you pay all this money, and people walk by. It's almost like you're a human pop-up ad. And some you know, make eye contact with, and you chat them up. Others you kind of walk by. But that's a traditionally a rich area for sales to kind of start and happen in food service. The other is just boots on the ground, showing up, getting those appointments, and meeting people in person, face to face. What do you like? What do you not like about the process? What would you change?
Oh my gosh. If I could wave a magic wand, I would probably figure out a way to completely revamp any connotation around salespeople. You talk about like walking booths, walking shows. I think we've all been there where we're walking it and we're like, that's a salesperson. Don't look, don't look, don't look, don't look. And I think that there's always going to be that connotation. Unfortunately, I'd love to wave a magic wand and undo that. So that's probably the one side of that I really hate. Because honestly, especially in this market, it's what we talked about at the very beginning. Working in this industry is really rewarding, and it's full of great people who care, people who want to serve others. So there's that where, like, with that mindset, this is a blast. This is a ton of fun. But what you're talking about there too is not only the trade shows, but also in person. Nutrislice is in a unique spot in that I don't think people are always researching, what's the best technology to get my menus in front of my guests today with allergen, nutrition information, pictures, descriptions, like all the things that we do. I don't think people are Googling that all the time. Hence them bouncing ideas off of each other regularly. So for us, we do have to be present. We do have to be around. We do got to be a part of committees and boards and organizations that allow us to sort of introduce ourselves in a very authentic way. One way we're doing that within our sales org is being very in person, being very personable, to the point that we've even put together this quarter a strategy fully focused on who should we go visit this quarter, who in the next 2.5 months should we go step into their office, take a tour of their facility, get to know them, buy them lunch, potentially, maybe buy them dinner, and just to build that relationship, get it to cross that golden bridge of texting back and forth, right? And that in-personness is another part of what just makes this industry so great, because it is a connection a connection business where we are connected to people in a lot of different ways, and shaking hands is a great first step and way of doing that. It shows that we care as much as they do.
I think attitude is so important in starting and engaging a sales process. A lot of times I feel like people love to buy, but they hate being sold to. And it's so critical to kind of empower that feeling. And the moment anyone starts to feel like they're being dragged through, a sales pitch or sales process, that's probably when you need to hit pause and either exit stage right or start over again. So attitude, really the attitude of the person who's selling and the attitude of the person who's buying needs to be aligned. What advice do you have on how both parties can just come with that right mindset?
Yeah. Dale Carnegie has a great book called How to Win Friends and Influence People. That title can be perceived incorrectly, but in that book, he talks about how people don't like to be convinced. And the best way of convincing someone is actually to enable them to be a part of that process and maybe even feel like it was their idea, right? And that's exactly why I think we are only successful when we take a collaborative, partner-driven type of approach in every single one of our conversations with the right, like you said, the right mindset and the right attitude. I think there's also, and I take the grocery store methodology of all the different sales approaches there are, right? There's Josh Brown, there's John Barrows, there's John Maxwell, there's Dale Carnegie, there's Sandler sales, there's Challenger sales. There's every single different way you could think of to qualify any sort of conversation out there. And ultimately, at the end of the day, understanding all of those so that you can create a collaborative experience and conversation with who you're talking to matters most, because you might have someone who, it just makes sense to just ask a bunch of questions and not impose any sort of like opinions or thoughts. And then maybe in another conversation, someone actually appreciates that style, and all of a sudden you're throwing the Challenger sale at them and you're going, well, what if you did this way? What impact would that have? And there's so many different ways about going about it. And I think at the end of the day, figuring out what works well for both sides and both parties, not only individually, but also organizationally, creates that perfect storm of an opportunity to work together. And no one feels convinced against their will.
That's great.
I think sales is an interesting thing. And I know that's the topic and the premise of what we're trying to hit on in this conversation. But I will say that I think Nutrislice in general is sort of its own entity. It's sort of its own beast within the world. And thinking about sales here is actually a little bit different than thinking about sales anywhere else. Career-wise for me, I've had the opportunity to go and learn from a ton of really, really talented and really, really smart people. I've had the opportunity to be in some really hard conversations as well as be in some really easy conversations. I've seen some weird stuff. I've had some fun clients. Shout out to Major League Baseball, who threw us tickets to the Home Run Derby and the All-Star Game when the All-Star Game was here in Denver, and that was my client. That was fun. But it's like there's just pieces of what we do here at Nutrislice that are just different because I think of our clientele, who the people we get to work with on a day-to-day basis, and the people who we're trying to work with on a day-to-day basis. There's a different level of passion behind what they do. And so I think for us as an organization, especially on the sales side, if we can tap that and match that level of passion and purpose behind what we do, we create the right type of momentum in all of our conversations. I think one of the things too, I mentioned earlier, is waving a magic wand and overcoming the perception of, oh, just another salesperson. I think it's our mission and our goal to help advance what the food service industry is doing. And if we can approach all of our conversations in a way that expresses that effectively, then we move from that just another salesperson to that trusted advisor as well.
It reminds me when Nutrislice first started, even before your time, we didn't really have much of a budget to do the traditional sales activities. And so we would go to these conferences and they would have the dedicated space where everyone would go to the exhibit hall, the exhibit floor. People would walk around. We were nowhere to be found there. And It was like a couple years before we actually did get a booth when you were here. But during that time, like the way that we differentiated ourselves and engaged people in a sales process was just listening and learning. We would go to the educational sessions, those talk tracks. When all the salespeople had, left the conference, we were there to learn, and that's where we saw just authentic dialogue and conversation. Here's what's on our mind. Here's the innovative things that we're doing. Here's where we see our industry, and I think that was really helpful. I wish even today that those who are selling in food service space would take a more holistic approach and view to how to help the space move forward. And it's not just showing up and pitching your product. It really is an art of listening and understanding and seeing where people are and where they'd like to be, and seeing if there's ways to help them get there. That I think was the genesis of Nutrislice and how we started, and I think it's part of the DNA, and something that we've always strove to do is be really good listeners and try to see what's authentic and organically happening inside the industries.
Yeah, and I love that. That's actually, I share all the time with people how much I just love this organization and the mindset and the way in which we approach things. Nutrislice is just unique in a lot of ways. But just to that end, I mentioned a whole bunch of different like sales methodologies, and there's a couple of other coaches that maybe I didn't mention, maybe I did, but Chris Voss and Josh Braun quote each other all the time. And they're both famous for talking about different ways to approach conversations. And Chris Voss especially is more around contract negotiations, and he's got a good book called Never Split the Difference. But what he talks about, and he and Josh Braun quote each other a lot of the times, is asking the client like, "Hey, can I sit on the same side of the table as you?" And I think when you're engaging in events and you're going to those education sessions and you're part of those networking events and you're going and meeting people in person like we are with our in-person strategy, and you're doing lunch and learns, you're actually intentionally putting yourself on the same side of the table as the client at the beginning, from the beginning, and you're basically like whiteboarding together at that point. And I think I've learned that a lot from you and Brian and Ben and those of you who were doing it before me here at Nutrislice. It's about being on the same side of the table from the get go, and you do that by going to those learning sessions and everything you're talking about there, and it's fun. To your point,
mean, absolutely.
When I started doing that, like it was fun to be the only vendor in there. You're like, "Hey guys, look, we're here. We care." Right?
My absolute favorite part of selling is when you can get on the same side of the table. You're part of the family, and you collaborate and you're brainstorming, and they're looking at you like, what can we do? How can we help move the needle here? Does your software, help us? And you're giving ideas and suggestions and showcasing how things can move forward for them. And that light bulb moment goes off, and they're like, this is exciting. The barriers come down, the obstacles are eliminated, and they just want to sprint at solutions so they can do better for their customers. Absolutely my favorite part of doing any sales.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the most important things we can do along those lines too is just ask a really simple question. What does success look like for you? Right? On how you operate today and what you do today, what does success look like, and how do you take that to the next level you're trying to achieve? And then we can figure out if we fit there.
Yeah. Well, Pat, as we wrap up, what is your favorite part of the sales process?
I mean, there's always that little bit of dopamine when the client says yes and signs on the dotted line, right? But I will say I really, really, really enjoy that first part also. I love the initial conversations, hearing what's important, digging into how can Nutrislice provide impact, going on site and seeing it in person even more. That's huge, because you can sort of you can be in a meeting and be on a call with a client, and they're telling you about what they're trying to do and trying to pass that vision on, and you go in person, you're like, oh, now I get it. So that early part and really crafting and getting that understanding and growing in that understanding is really, it's fun. It's exciting. And of course, I think, anybody who's a part of the growth arm of their organization loves when the growth is happening. So
that's fantastic. Well, Pat, you do have some children.
I do.
What are the odds that they watch this podcast?
My oldest, if I were to tell her about it, it'd be a 100% odds that she would watch it.
Yeah.
She loves to learn. She's extremely scholarly, and she's always curious about what's going on.
You better end with a shout out to the children.
Yeah. My younger 3, very low chances. Very low.
For the record, your children are like 4 or 5 years old, right?
Yeah, 11, 9, and then I have 4-year-old twins. Yeah. So.
Well, why don't you close? Say hello to them. Let them know you're famous.
Yeah, kids, go do your homework. No, I'm just kidding. Clean your room, and I love you.
That's awesome. Pat Stevens, VP Sales at Nutrislice. Thank you for joining us, talking about all things partnerships, development, best practices, in engaging in sales activities inside the food service world.
Absolutely.
I am Mike, your host. Thank you for another edition of Pass the Tots. We look forward to catching up with you soon.